That's what it said on my screen anyway. So yeah, look, thank you very much, everybody's patience with this. So Erena and Nat, thank you so much, and Marianne for standing in for Kerri and her technical problems that she's got. Kerri doesn't live that far away from me, only about 10 kilometres away or something like that, but the internet in Western Australia has become very, very difficult. So today what we're hoping to do is to explore the way in which the victim and the bully is actually operating in the current struggle. So I'm calling it a struggle today because that's how it feels. You know, the information that's coming through to me from you know, people in our community, at least anyway, is that they're finding it really, really difficult, and they're beginning to be extremely alarmed about authoritarian shifts and that type of thing. That's obviously in Australia as well on the other coast, and we've got a new piece of legislation, and the government, in what I would consider to be a complete bullying turn of opportunity this morning, are putting notices in the newspaper saying that unless people actually sign up to this app, another 5 million people, in fact, unless they actually sign up to the app and download it, then they're not going to be able to open the country up for a, you know, considerable future. So, you know, this is manipulation and bullying. You know, as I see it. Now, I might be seeing it wrong, and perhaps I'm overly sensitive, but I think that's probably a good place for us to start, and we can just look into that and what's going on in terms of the organisational setting.
Sounds like tyranny to me.
Well, I can tell you that in Germany, they are going to pass a law that it is compulsory that you prove that you're immune against corona. So they are not talking about a compulsory vaccination, but they're talking that you have to prove that you are immune, which is still worse because the test is not verified. You are not immune after vaccination, even after. And once you get the corona, you are not immune anyway. So there's nearly no possibility to prove it, and they will restrict traveling to the proof.
Right. Are they testing for antibodies over there? Because the antibodies would tell you if you've had it before, but it can't tell you if you currently have an infection in you. It just tells you if you've had a positive immune response. I mean, what are they doing around that at the moment?
I wish to welcome Kerri.
Hi.
Finally. Hey, she's here.
Finally.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so
sorry. They're still going for the test, which is not really validating, and they're not testing antibodies. They're just testing the fragments again. And as we already know, it's a designer virus, and testing fragments is for nothing. So it's all about bullying in reality. And now that Kerri is in, I'm finished holding the space for her, and I will open the discussion to you people down there, and I hope you have a lot of fun. I'm just asking you to finish the discussion within the next 1 hour and 15 minutes, because then the other restream starts. Have fun, I'm listening.
We'll be finished before then. Thanks, Marianne. Okay, so Kerri, thank you. We were just talking about the moves of the Australian government to basically stand over tactics, that they won't open up the country because they're not enough people actually joining up with this tracking app. And we just thought that would be a good place to start the conversation around this victim and bully experience. And what I'm particularly interested in is to try and work out some creative solutions. So the hope is today that we're going to actually spark each other to find some creative solutions around us. So not necessarily that we have a solution against what the Australian government's doing, but certainly that we can work against this victim and bully thing. So maybe my languaging is wrong, you know, to work against is probably the wrong language, but I'm not sure. So I'll open it up. Sorry about all of the hassles for everyone.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Do you want to speak first, Nat, or?
I'm finding that I'm just jumping in from my perspective. I'm a bit like, whoa, coming into this today, because that was actually just news to me this morning, and not actually where I thought the conversation was going to go. So I'm like, whoa, I didn't really want to take a stand against the government today, and it's certainly not what I'm sort of coming from, as wanting to sort of do this for and against thing, because that's exactly part of the problem I feel right now, is like that we keep the government in a way is just another expression, can be another expression of parents and authority in our life. And ultimately, in the end, I think we have freedom regardless of what anyone does to us on the outside, like the ultimate freedom we have on the inside to choose where we're going. So I don't necessarily see it as an us versus them scenario as much as I'm sort of open to sort of discussing the strategy around it, I guess, in terms of what are the themes underneath that. And it's obviously, like, to me, it sort of seems like a move of, you would come to that when you feel like people are not complying. It seems like well, this is the way to deal with the naughty children kind of strategy. If not enough people are complying, then we kind of, it's that aspect coming back in again of people aren't, if we ask them to do it, they're not doing it. Therefore, now how do we get them to comply? Like, that's always a tricky thing when you're in an authority position. Like for them to, you know, how do you motivate an entire population of people towards a specific outcome or towards a specific goal? How do you? What are the ways? What are the strategies that you move them towards that without relying back on the old authoritarian parent positive, negative reinforcement, the simplicity of that style of positive consequence, negative consequence? Yeah. And allowing us to be more complex as humans than just that. Does that sort of make sense?
Totally. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my understanding of it is that if we keep doing the same things, we'll keep getting the same results. Mm-hmm. So when we keep reacting to what's happening around us, we're gonna keep getting resistance, and that, because a reaction is a fear-based response as opposed to a response which is thought about and considered. So when we look at what's going on, and we know that our thoughts and our words carry very powerful vibration, and when it's coming from a heart-based place, the power is even increased. So what is my response to this? How am I going to respond? And the thing that was so powerful to me when I was faced with the bully constantly, was all of a sudden I had the epiphany that they were hurt, they were wounded. And when I continue to react to them and to yell back or come from a disempowered place, that enabled that cycle to continue. But when I saw their hurt, and I mean, it's just like a cat. You imagine a wounded cat who is hurt and is absolutely terrified. Their hackles are up, they're spitting, they're hissing, and they're ready to attack. You need to earn their trust, and you need to help them to understand that they are that they can be safe. So one of the ways of seeing this is to see the people that are in these positions of power perhaps as absolutely terrified. They're probably terrified that they're going to lose their job, and all of the potential things that can happen because of what's happened leading up to this point, and they're sensing the anger from the masses. I mean, I was experiencing anger from one person, and I know that was bad enough, but for somebody to be experiencing the anger of millions of people, their internal response must be so reactive, so they're not even in a place that they can think. So when we can see them as wounded and as needing space held for them, love to me is the only thing that will heal. And that, however, we are talking about something that is even bigger than that. So I'm not quite sure what that has to offer, but it's a perspective that, yeah, so when we see them as wounded, as hurting, as maybe broken, I don't really like to use that term, we can come to them from an empowered place, holding empathy as opposed to anger, but I'm not 100% sure there.
What's your take on it, Kerri?
Yeah, so that's all really interesting discussion. For me, I really resonate with a lot of what has been said already. And, you know, there is that sort of thing that keeps coming up about, you know, the fact we need to resolve the internal conflict. And, you know, when you look at invasion and response, when you look at the virus, when you look at the colonization, it's all saying the same thing. And when I sort of sat into it earlier, that's what I was really getting, is the bully is in fear and in pain. And it is about us actually really modeling and mentoring how we have resolved our internal conflict and present a positive solution going forward. I have a really strong internal reaction to a lot of this stuff and a lot of the languaging and a lot of the government strategies, and both in Australia and New Zealand, and, you know, and the history of colonization, and the history is horrible. So it's sort of like, okay, so we have this other experience, and we need to understand that we're all one, and we are together one with the government. We are together one with the virus. We are together one with the story of vaccinations and immunizations and all of these tests and all of these things. It's like, how do we actually come together and embrace us all as a collective and say, you know, inhale love, exhale fear, let's hold space so that strategies can be developed. And I think that there needs to be a multitude of different strategies. And I think it is a time to say, we the people also join with the land and join with the government. We want safety, we want autonomy, we want freedom to make choices. We all want to be healthy, we all want to be well. How do we come and negotiate a space forward?
I'd just like to add to that, what you mentioned about inhale love, exhale fear. I would like to see inhale love and exhale love, because love transforms.
Well.
So when we're exhaling fear, we're contributing, but when we can exhale love, and yes, I did get what you meant, but the listeners may not.
I definitely agree. That's one of the things that I say. And then I also say inhale love and exhale love as well. When we go through the breath work, it's at the end, it's always inhale and exhale bliss and love. Absolutely. Yeah. But, you know, it's thinking about moving beyond that fear-based response, moving beyond the reactiveness and saying, you know, let's hold space for each other to come into the place where we've resolved our internal conflict with ourselves and with other. And begin to see that as one space that we're holding and we're moving in a positive direction with. I don't know if that sounds a little bit too airy-fairy, but I really believe that there's room for everything. There's room for some social action. There's room for education. There's room for looking at the younger generations coming up and being able to actually educate and support and mentor and model around health and well-being and autonomy and choice.
Well, what a bully does, and what the bully mindset creates in us, is the belief that there are no other possibilities than what we're experiencing now. And people, I think it's vital that people actually realise that they have a choice, but there are possibilities. It is possible to have a different experience. For years, I believed that it wasn't possible for me to have any other experience than the hell that I was in. Whereas once I started to get the glimmer of what actually was possible in a relationship, then I could start making steps towards that. And I think there's so many people out there that are so fearful, or else so just blocked from the fact that there is possibilities.
Absolutely.
So Nat, you know, like you were pointing out right at the beginning there, that the idea of taking a stance. So this notion of taking a position is the beginning of the route towards this duality. So, like, you know, where we start down that track is the place that we take a stance. However, you know, as Kerri's talking about, there are, you know, like there is an opportunity for, you know, some type of disagreement with the government. So, like, some people are going to be, and in fact, millions of people in Australia will be, you know, getting that newspaper article, and it's going to be highly polarizing. And for many people, they're going to be saying, well, no, this is not good enough. So we've got positions being taken. So how do we inside ourselves, you know, between the four of us and Marianne, who's listening to us as well, I'm sure that there's plenty of opportunity for us to have love for ourselves, and love for each other, and love for the government, and love for the medical, you know, community, and so on and so forth. So, like, we can do that, and that's an inner thing. But at some point, you know, where, you know, that you actually transport from there into a place where you actually have to create boundaries, and we can create boundaries in a loving way, but we nonetheless actually are going to be faced with a you know, situation where a boundary is going to have to be you know, created. And, you know, I can say personally that the chances of me downloading an app to track me aren't high. It's just not likely. You know, it's not likely that I will do that.
Yes.
And it's
same,
not likely.
likewise.
Yeah, and I'm not.
Likewise
I'm not
for me.
So, but likewise, I'm unlikely to agree to be vaccinated as well. So I can take that as being, I am the government, I am the people, I am Neil, I am all of us together. I can transverse all the way through all of that. But at some point, there has to be a hand held up by Neil saying, you know, like, I don't think this is reasonable.
Yeah.
How do we do that in a way where it's not actually partaking in this victim and bully? That's my question.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a big risk when we first have an initial reaction to something, like you're talking about the initial huge heat of the reaction of no way am I going anywhere near any of that. Erena and I were talking about earlier, like, any time that we have a heated response to anything, there's always a possibility there that we ask, okay, what's this really about, before we unleash it on the world, right? So there's a possibility there that one could react in going straight for a very black and white, total take a stance against the government. There's a more, what I was getting at was like, so I feel exactly as you do in terms of vaccinations. I have huge reactions to them. So just from a health standpoint alone, like, I'm not in a great place with them. So part of me wants to set a boundary right there and say, if there's any way I don't have to, that's my preference. Likewise with the app, I'm concerned about the tracking aspects of it. And again, part of me wants to raise a boundary and say, I don't want that. At the same time, as part of me just doesn't want that to be like, I don't want to escalate into a place of going, now I'm completely for a rebellion and I'm completely against the government, because that's, again, that goes into the black and white place. What I'm saying is when we're having a huge reaction to something, maybe the first place to come back to is, okay, whoa, okay, so I feel this. So let me acknowledge that something huge is triggering in me right now. This is triggering me. What's that about? What's going on for me right now? So why is that triggering me? So why is it a big deal? Why do I feel threatened by the government taking away my power right now? What's going on with that? And if you get into the layers of a more therapeutic approach, there might be something deeper underneath that, just beyond the initial reaction. There's absolutely the aspect of, yes, we have to say something to the government, but then there's this separate aspect of what's the process that's just going on for us individually right now. And I sort of am of like what I try and work with people around when we've got stuff like this, when you're in a high state of reactivity and then you're trying to engage with other people from that place to have a conversation, I would say part of the thing sometimes is to just bring it back to ask each other that question of, okay, so what's really going on for me right now? What do I really want to say? What really needs to be said before I unleash the fury of this onto this issue, onto this article, onto this person, onto the government, onto whoever? What's really going on? Because what if there is some childhood trauma underneath this that you've played out a pattern your whole life, that you're still sorting out, finding your authority in life separate to just the government? Like there's a whole heap of something else that's going on. There can be other things that are going on underneath this as well. So to be able to find the place where we can have an objective conversation from the observer standpoint, there's feeling our stuff and there's acknowledging when we're pissed off and there's acknowledging our process and there's taking time to have that and to feel all that. And then there's also the place that we can come to when we've done that, where we are like, okay, so I've calmed down a little bit. I was going to say too, literally while we are in the place of the reactivity and we're highly in overwhelm and we're highly emotive, if we're freaking out because of stress, if we're freaking out because of grief, if we're freaking out because of anger, like we've gone into parts of our brain that are not then connected to the logical, rational, making the smart decisions, not necessarily even connected to the intuitive parts in that moment, right? And then we go into this whole other reaction, which disconnects us from the part of us that we need to really feel into what is the highest good, what is the highest action, or what is the course of action that I really need to take in this situation. So bringing it back to having time to just deal with your own process and ask what's the deeper thing beyond this before we then come back to the government conversation of, okay, so what is actually going to be my actual strategy to how I cope with this in life, in terms of what you're saying, in terms of taking an actual stance on, okay, so I need to communicate to them, I'm not in for this app, I'm not in for this vaccination, I'm not in for all of this. And then without preempting any steps in advance of them actually coming up, like just taking it one step at a time, like let's deal with one thing at a time. Again, if we go into a catastrophic what if way of thinking, is that warranted right now? Is that premature? Like that's a whole other issue in terms of like stopping the escalation of the panic process, right? And the what if and the catastrophization kind of thinking. Like how do we bring it back to, again, how do I be centered in this to feel into what is my ultimate truth? And then what is the best course of action beyond that? Does that make sense relative to your question?
It makes complete sense. The query sitting in there, which perhaps is difficult to actually get to, is what do you do? What do you do? How do you actually take action? Because we can identify that we need to only act from a place of coherence. Well, good. Completely agree with you. So I'm now coherent. I'm sitting here. I'm coherent. I need to take action. How do I do that in a way which doesn't reinforce the victim and the bully? How do I do that?
So separate to, because again, whatever's going on with with authority, with the government, with anyone right now, right? Whatever is their process within every one of those people, that's their stuff. That's not our business. When it impacts us personally, it becomes our business. When it's imposed upon us, it becomes our business. But I think, again, it's about finding the way to, for a start, like the bully victim thing, or the victim perpetrator rescuer triangle as another expression of this. Like, one still has to invest in that to see it that way, right? Because that's still investing in a mindset that chooses to see it as it's me versus them, or it's us versus them. I think the helpful place to see it from is, what's my truth and how am I going to act from there? So in that respect, it seems like the logical course of action at this point is, if you have, or if I have, or if anyone's made this basic decision of I'm not participating in this, then the simple action is to do that, right? One could express, there are people in our community who are community leaders in terms of government representatives and people like that. There are people that we could, if we wanted to express our concern to, in that, you know, I'm a little bit worried about the approach to this, and you can write them the letters. And if you want to actually engage in making change process, I mean, you've got to get in the room with the people who can actually influence, right? In which case, feeling into a next course of action around that, like, I'd be then feeling into, again, like the productive action. What's the productive action that can get me action? My concern with a lot of protests and a lot of actions where we go against something is that that's blocking the possibility of a conversation. It's assuming I'm not going to, it's almost like coming from the stance already of I'm not going to get what I want, so I'm not going to try and sit down with a government party, a politician, or whoever, and try and have an adult logical conversation, right? Or with someone who, or a health official, or someone who can like change this. I don't think we want to automatically assume by default that we're not going to be met if we speak up, right? Because a lot of these people, I've worked with a lot of people in the medical industry, I've worked with a lot of people in political circumstances. I don't find it to be the truth all the time that they're just, you know, soulless, or that they're whatever they are. These are people who are trying to do the best in a crappy situation, right? So if we can come to it from the standpoint of seeing that there's a human in there and have a conversation from that place, and assume that we can take action in terms of whatever we do, whoever we engage with, come from that, how do we find solutions standpoint, as opposed to communicate what I'm for, right? As opposed to automatically by default rebelling against what we're against. Like, in choosing our actions, does that help? Does that help guide our action to a place where we can make a positive change and have positive impact, as opposed to automatically puts us in a position of war, right? Because now because you can have a position of, I have a different position to an opinion to you, but how do we keep it out of going into a war thing of, you're not honoring my position, you're not hearing me right now, therefore I need to start a war with you, and I need to rebel against you and take to the street and do it, you know, and do it that way, because I'm assuming that I'm never going to be met if I have a conversation with you. Does that add another layer?
Well, I don't know. What does everybody think?
One of the things that was popping into my mind was the whole hurt people. So when we are feeling attacked, when we're feeling powerless, most of the time the way that we react to that is by creating more conflict, because we're coming to it with that energy of powerlessness. So one of the things that I've found really powerful, and that's something that I need to continue to practice very frequently, is that, how do I want to be treated? And becoming that person that wants to be treated with respect, wants to feel safe, wants to feel accepted and respected and appreciated. So when I become that, then I open myself to having the experiences of that, and the people around me start to become that as well. So as Kerri alluded to before, it starts with us as individuals, and the more of us that can put our differences aside and realize that actually we want to, we crave connection. We crave being respected, accepted, appreciated, valued, that we matter. And when we can be that person ourselves, then others around us, and we know that 100 monkey syndrome concept, that the more of us that become that, then there's less that are the other way, and eventually the scales tip. So that was just my take on that. You know, we have, in every moment, we have the choice of how we're going to respond to somebody. And we can choose not responding at all, which is sometimes the safer way to do it, because it stops the conflict full stop. However, sometimes we do need to make a response. And it's, so how can I make this response in the most empowering way possible, not just for me, but for the other person. And to make that really clear. And that's one of the really interesting things about anger from Chinese medicine perspective. Anger is a cry from the body for boundaries. When we experience anger, it's because our boundaries have been crossed, or we don't have our own personal boundaries. They're not as they need to be, and we're doing something, or something's happening that is going against the truth of who we are. So in one aspect, anger is a really powerful tool for us, because it's telling us that actually there's something going on here that is making us really, really uncomfortable. How can we become that person who has got strong boundaries, and who is a person that wants to be respected and accepted, not just by ourselves, but by others around us? So it's a daily challenge for us all to be that person. But when we can work on that, when we can practice that, and it becomes easier, but also we notice around us, the people around us will change, and that gives us then that deeper appreciation that yes, we are powerful, we can create change, we can be part of a bigger movement just by working on ourselves.
Okay, so Kerri, what's your thoughts about that? Like I'm agreeing with everybody, which is always a dangerous situation.
Yeah, I particularly like Erena. I absolutely resonate with everything there. Like, I think, you know, if you look at the experience of domestic violence or bullying in that context, you know, even though I'm a staunch feminist and a supporter for marginalised groups, the thing is, there's always that space where we have to ask, where do I, as the victim of the bully, if you're going to put it in that languaging, where do I agree with that? So it is about saying, actually, collectively, we have given away our power, you know, because it wouldn't be unless it was, you know. So we wouldn't have this situation unless it was that on some level, and on all levels, we agree with the fact that we've actually sold off or given away a lot of our autonomy and power. So I do think it comes back to that, you know, as above, so below. Let's start with us. Let's actually raise our vibration so high that everyone within our field has changed. And how do we do that? Like in a strategy, I actually think like there is a space for really alerting and engaging with those that are conscious and really waking up and saying, hey, collectively, let's be the strategy. Let's show the solution. Like, we are whole with ourselves. We've resolved our internal conflict. We are understanding that we're all together and we're holding space for us all. And, you know, it is about, sometimes, you know, the word power is a bit of it's a very polarizing word. So empowering and power with are words that, you know, you can sort of think about, but it is holding that space and that power in every moment. And just like Erena said, it's every day, it's every moment, it's every response, every reaction, every thought, every opportunity, every choice, where we're saying, I love and honor myself, and I love and honor this planet, and I love and honor other, as I understand, in duality. And you know, and I resolve my internal conflict with myself. I really do. I can hear everybody's perspective and really agree. And I always think it comes back to the self, and then the community and the environment come out of that. So I really think there's still work to do with us ones and with those who are available and awake to sort of together join in this way of saying, how do we love and honor ourselves, and how do we love and honor other, even when it is that it's so polarizing and we have that response of wanting to go to war. And, you know, and we know that in the past, what we resist persists. So we know that that's not the way forward. So this is an opportunity for another way forward. It's been created because it exists in us, or it wouldn't be here. Yeah.
One of the things that's just popping into my mind is when I for years, I was getting told, Erena, you just have to take your power back. You have to take your power back. And I was so resistant to that, because it's like when you look around society and see these so-called powerful people, like, why the heck would I want to be like that? And, and it took me a long time. And it was when I was standing there that moment in front of somebody going bleh at me and all the accusations and that, and I had that realization, oh my goodness, they're hurting. In that moment, I knew that I had taken my power back, because I realized that I had choice, and I realized that I had the opportunity to respond in a way that stopped that cycle in its tracks right then and there. And it was up to me to do that. Hey, I'm human. And there have been many, many times since that moment that I've failed, that I've reacted. But it's always the opportunity to apologise and then to move forward. And, you know, the results of that have been absolutely transformative. But it is possible for us to come to a place where we can actually stand up and say, well, actually, I don't agree with that. That doesn't fit right with me. But there's a process that needs to go through that. And it's about that self. It's actually about releasing all forms of judgment against ourselves and against others, because we know that we all are doing what we feel is best and right, given the information that we've had, the experiences that we've had. But everything's just perspective. So what you see as right and good, I might not agree with. But that doesn't mean to say that I can't honour your perspective, and that doesn't mean to say that I can't, you know, accept you for who you are. It's about releasing that judgment, because when we've got judgment against others, we've got it against ourselves, and this is what continues that bully victim cycle. The judgment, blame, shame, and criticism.
Okay, well, look, I can see we're all in complete agreement about this internal process, you know, the process that we individually are taking. We'll still come back to the question of how do we actually, as a community, you know, transact this process as a community. Like, you know, Nat, you were talking about, you know, if you felt the urge to, you could talk to your member of parliament, or you could, you know, campaign in some way like that, in a peaceful sort of way, peaceful, logical, heartfelt, however you want to describe it. There's all those things you could do. But, you know, the separation that actually is inherent in the victim bully setting. So, like, you know, if we're dealing with that type of paradigm, then separation, you know, divide and rule, or however you want to think about it, is inherent in it. And so if we're going to be doing something different beyond collecting ourselves, becoming more coherent ourselves, if we're going to do something beyond that, it needs to be something, or it would appear to me to need to be something which we're doing collectively. So how does that work in a truly non-violent way? Because what we're all talking about is a non-violent approach, non-violence to ourselves, non-violence to another person.
Yep. So I might just share a couple of my experiences in recent months of another strategy in terms of just going beyond working with your members of parliament or people in positions of power like that. I've had the great privilege in recent months of working through the events industry and through my background in working with a lot of entrepreneurs. I was working with some events companies where they had some amazing entrepreneurs who, separate to before the whole bushfire scenario in Australia and before everything kind of unfolded in that, they were separate to, because the government had their sort of stance and some things they were doing around that. But like there was aspects of various entrepreneurs were using their resources and their knowledge and their tools and coming together in just starting to create some technologies and set up initiatives separate to everything else, that they were just like, well, we're just going to start leading the way anyway. And again, it was from a very just, what do I have the power to do? What resources do we have? And then they just started working with each other on, okay, so let's just start doing this and start creating actions from that place. And then they worked within their networks. And I'm just trying to think of one particular technology. There was one technology that was released around sustainable energy that I'm thinking of, but I just can't think of, struggling to think of the specific details of it, but I probably don't need them for the context of the discussion, and maybe doesn't help to say who it was. But the point was, so entrepreneurially, that's one way, like the people who do have money and resources, like they're already doing it. They're already doing things already that they're just looking at, okay, so what can we create? And even with in New South Wales at the moment, there's like a lot of people the government would call it retooling, that they're shifting focus within their businesses to come up with solutions, whether it's medical technology solutions, whether it's whatever other solutions, whether it's community management solutions. There's whole groups of people from an entrepreneurial perspective that are coming together to do that. And then in addition to that, there's community groups. So I know I'm on the mailing list of some community groups as well, who they work a lot more with the non-for-profit side of things and charities and disadvantaged groups and representative bodies for them. And so people like that are doing webinars and having groups at the moment where they're creating discussion spaces, and they're talking about, okay, so how do we manage these things? Or how do we, how is COVID, or how is isolation? How are these things impacting directly our community right now? And then they're having, think tank kind of meetings and coming up with strategies and then talking about things that they can do together. So it's just a matter of knowing where they are and finding the people who are who are getting together to create strategy and create actions in that respect. I think there's certainly more we can be doing in that respect. And remembering that those possibilities are open to anyone, regardless of how much money you have. There's a spectrum of that we can all work together within that. So it's just a matter of finding your entry point to that.
This comes into that whole concept of connection. We need to find connection with people who have got foresight, and then having the collaboration within the community. And going forward in a united way. And, that whole compassion, connection, communication, collaboration and cooperation is something that are vital in breaking this bully victim cycle.
Yeah, well, welcome back, Marianne. Obviously, Kerri's had a technical problem there. You've been listening. Is there anything that you have to particularly add in here? Like I guess where we're up to is the point that we understand that we have the need to be coherent individually, and then, but the process of action, we can individually take action, obviously, in some way or another, if we feel as though that the information needs to be shared. but the opportunities for a cooperative position is what we're exploring. And I must say, one of the things that goes through my mind is, you know, is there an alternate way of actually making sure that the viral spread is contained other than having a tracking app? Is there some way that we can give confidence that we are being in some way, you know, helping to manage the process, if indeed you believe that that's an issue? And yeah, but also at the same time actually sort of respecting them, having a respect for the fact that they have this role in our elected governance type of setting to take these steps, you know, like it's their job to be doing that. But anyway, I'll throw it over to you, Marianne. What have you got to have to say on that?
I'm very grateful that Kerri gives me the space to talk. While I heard you people talking, I was thinking of a viper. Lately I had a talk with a viper about territories. And the viper told me how they do it, how she and the cats are not in conflict because they know about territories, and they are not acting from their ego, they are acting from their self and their sovereignty. And the viper told me that a territory in reality is nothing about space. It's about space and time. It's a floating thing. And that we have to realize that wherever our territory is, there might be other territories. And we just have to learn how to float around each other, and then there would be no problem ever. And I thought if we could do that with all the microbiomes, all the microbiome we are living with, all the viruses, and all the bullies, and all the victims, and all the already sovereign beings, then we would not meet a problem. But it's about our own self-responsibility and our autarky, our sovereignty that radiates. And all that radiates doesn't need a boundary. Because the radiation is what takes space in time and in space and just cares for itself. This is what I wanted to add.
I call that acceptance, when we can be accepting of who we are, warts and all, who the other is, warts and all, and how can we dance together in and through life and create magic. It's challenging sometimes, but it is possible.
Yes. Can I share a metaphor / a little process model that just came to me from, you know, something I've worked on in recent years? Because I've got this model, and some of my colleagues have got a similar model around the process of finding your voice. And I often talk about the 4 stages of finding your voice, in that for a start, for a lot of women and for some people in specific areas and generations as well, I think sometimes, and for many of the people I've worked with in the wellness industry in the previous decade, a lot of the time the place we're starting from, and this was me personally too as well, having been through a lot of abuse younger in life and sort of adapted a strategy of, you know, people pleasing to try and appease and to like de-escalate the conflict within that. Part of my initial strategy was then the silence strategy, right? So it's like, just don't say anything. Don't say anything that's going to escalate people. Don't say anything that's going to upset people. Don't rock the boat. Just try and be as beige and under the radar as you can. Not necessarily beige. I wasn't always trying to be beige, but just, you know, trying to say nothing, don't create waves, right? So that's like the first stage of we try and avoid it completely. It's avoidance. Then the second level, you come to realizing, okay, this is not getting me what I want. This is not meeting my needs. This is getting me hurt that I'm not saying anything at all. I'm not meeting my needs at all. Therefore, I need to start saying something. So we start testing using our voice, right? And then we start speaking to what we want and having a go at it. But the tricky thing about when we get to this phase is that we still sort of doubt ourselves a bit. We're worried that we're still going to upset the other person, and is this still okay? So we tend to then, we feel a bit soft. We don't feel like 100% owning our conviction, in expressing our truth. And then that can be when we still find that on the external world, people's response to that will be either to still do what they want or to not necessarily respect what we said, because we're not fully believing it, we're not fully owning it, so why should they necessarily? So sometimes they and not even because, you know, not that they shouldn't respect us, but just we're not being clear, right? We're not being 100% decisive in being clear in, no, this is what I need from you right now. So how can they respond with a clear response? That's the blur of stage 2. Then stage 3, it's like we go over the top now. This is where it's like we become the verbal flamethrower of either the pressure's built up so much because we haven't said where we're at, or we think that, a bit like with when we were kids and, you know, our parents ended up yelling at us for that thing, and, you know, the consequence to get the children to do what we wanted, there was a part withdrawing and kind of shutting our heart chakra to go, okay, you need to know that I'm disapproving of you and I'm withdrawing my love as a punishment right now. And or the yelling is supposed to intimidate them, right? That was in a whole generations of, certainly in Australia, were raised with that philosophy of, I need to intimidate you into doing what I want, as opposed to appealing to the sentientness in them. So then there's that belief that's sitting in the collective and the individuals that I need to go hard on you in order for you to get the point. And if I don't think you're getting the point, then I need to roast you. I need to show you my anger. I need to show you how pissed off I am, right? So then we go over the top and we get explosive. Only for the average person to be on the receiving end of that, it feels like they just got roasted with the flamethrower. Because the average person is like, hey, man, I love you. I'm your friend. I want to work with you. Like, I want to help you meet your needs, but I need to know what you need from me. What do you want? How do I help you right now, right? For most people in our lives, that's the case. And even out in the greater world, like most people, there's some people that aren't, but, you know, a lot of people are like, I just need to know how you need me to support you so as we can work together. Yeah. So we tend to, in stage 3, go over the top, and it's like the aggression, like it gets very loud and huge, the response. And then the final response is in stage 4. It's sort of what Marianne was just speaking to. It's the realization. I realized this when I was standing on the beach one day, right? And it was breezy and I had my feet in the water and the waves were lapping over my ankles. And the ocean's powerful, right? It's not trying to be forceful and intimidate anyone. It moves across the whole world and it has a tremendous amount of potential energy contained in it. And it's this huge, it moves a lot of water in a lot of ways, right? But it's not trying to be powerful. And like Marianne said with the ego, it's not trying to prove anything. It's just being water. Same with the wind. It's blowing over me while I was standing on that beach, but it's not trying to blow me down. But if I stop resisting against it, like I start moving backwards, because just the sheer force of nature and the way that wind is on this planet, like the wind has the power to make me step backwards with the force of how strong it was that day. It just is. It's just powerful. And so I realized that, like, in stage 4, that stage is just us speaking our truth. It's just us standing there 100% centered in our hearts, being able to just share exactly where we're at, in a state of trust, in trusting the other person that they want the best for us, and knowing that, having that trust, that faith that the universe is conspiring in our favor at all times to meet us, right? And if we trust in that and then we try and speak from that place, then there's no need to be forceful. There's no need to be aggressive. There's no need to withhold. It just is what it is. It's just our truth. And in order to get anywhere in the world, if we want to do anything, there may not be action required. It may just be the act of expressing truth. But that final stage is just the realization that you are powerful exactly as you are, exactly as 100% owning the being that you are, 100% owning your truth. And that's all you need to do to make a point in the world, is communicate from that place. And when we start, like, communicating from a full body place where we're fully centered in ourselves, inside our bodies, and communicating and looking people in the eyes from that heart-centered place, the response you get from people is completely different. It's like Erena is saying, right? When you communicate from that place, people respond to you in a different way. And when you look people in the eyes from that place, it breaks any part of the patterning I've found, because in trying this, like it breaks for any of the things that I used to see in the past too, with like, and I had examples, like I was working in a hospital one day and I'd upset a guy because I cooked falafels in the kitchen and they smelled, and I'd done it repeatedly. So one day he has a go at me in front of everyone, right? And he's like, oh, stupid falafels, I'm sick of the stupid falafels. So I just kind of breathed and I centered myself, and I was just like, first name, not going to tell you what his guy is, but say his name was Barry, like let's make up a name. I said, can we just have a chat outside for a minute? No aggression, no anything else, but just like I just wanted to express to him that there's another way that we can resolve this without him having to intimidate a woman in front of a group of people, right? So I went outside with him in the corridor and he completely immediately changed. He was like, all of a sudden it was like he was a little boy, or he was like completely backtracking, going, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be offensive, I didn't mean to be nasty. And he just completely started backtracking. I said, it's okay, I hear you. I hear that you're upset right now. I hear that you're not liking the smell of my falafels, right? I said, so we can talk about that. There's things we can do about that. I don't have to eat them every day in here if it's really a big deal for you, or I can like do it another time when you're, you know, we can have lunches at different times, or there's a whole heap of ways that we can deal with this, right? That doesn't need to involve you having a go at me in front of the group. And he's like, I'm sorry. And then we came to a place where we could actually work on solutions. And that was just from sitting in that place of communicating my truth without going, okay, this guy's bullying. Like, so there was a thing that it's like, okay, so I get what his strategy is, I get what he's doing, but I'm not playing into the energy and the emotion of it. I'm just going, we just need to have an adult heart-centered conversation here, because there's two people that have two sets of needs. There's a way through that. We just need to get to the bottom of what that is. Make sense in the context of my model?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. That's like the 4 stages.
It makes context. It just helps, not ego talking to ego. It helps to get to a stage where a self talks to a self, or a Buddha to be talks to a Buddha to be.
So we're still left in a place where we are trying to, you know, convert this, you know, like an individual action into something collective. So we're still sitting in a place here where there's a group of people who are feeling in a certain way, and so therefore they are creating the kinds of boundaries that you're talking about there, Nat, with the falafels. And so, you know, like if we extend falafels out to, you know, these other things that we're talking about, you know, there needs to be a bridge of some sort. So I'm just interested in if any of you have got an idea of a bridge to actually take it to a community level.
I think that the bridge definitely is about looking at yourself. Be responsible, that you don't talk from the place of your ego, but that you come so far that you are a sovereign being and you talk your truth. And that everybody is responsible for. And if everybody does that, we will have different conversations. So it's the responsibility to go from ego to self, and that will remove the victim and the bully, I think.
When we are having a conversation with somebody, and we can look beyond what's presenting, when we can hear beyond the words that are being used and see them in their potential, see what they could possibly become, then we have opportunity to have a different conversation. Now, it can be challenging to see the potential in somebody who is being abusive in that, but it is certainly absolutely possible, and that's the place where magic happens for me anyway, I've experienced when I can bring myself back to what's the possibilities here? How can I show up in a way that I can see this person's potential, see beyond what's being presented and see what is possible with them? And then the whole conversation is very different. So, you know, maybe that's something that we can start practicing, is actually see, well, what sort of person, what sort of people do I want to hang out with? What are their qualities? What were the conversations that we would be having? And then look at everybody through that energy, through that perspective.
I guess when you're really in yourself, it doesn't matter whom you talk to. You will see the Buddha in each one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
True. And then if somebody, like if we have a position right now where collectively we want to communicate something, then starting a get up or like one of the petitions, like from that place, from a what we're for place, and coming from that place and saying, okay, who else feels the same way if we're to collectively get together a series of people that we want to communicate this as a group, like that's a far more constructive place to then start a group cause like that from the love in me sees the love in you. If we're starting it from that place and we're leading from that place, from what one of my other mentors of recent years would talk about as, you know, the highest version of me speaking to the highest version of you. You're just holding that intention, but then creating your leadership initiatives from that place, and whatever groups we bring together, if we're holding that mentality, it changes the outcome in terms of, it just changes the energy of the whole movement. Like as the people come towards it, they will come towards it with a different energy. One of my friends who's a marketing coach, he often talks about when he posts on social media, if you go picking a fight, if you go looking for a fight and you post something that's highly inflammatory, that's like poking a stick in a wound on social media, you'll get a response that's like a bunch of people poking a wound, right? But if you talk to the positive side of an issue, I mean, we can't get past the fact that, you know, there's something we're against here. I don't want a needle in my arm to give me a vaccine against this thing. And I'm saying this as someone who's in an extremely high risk position of ending up on a ventilator right now. If I get it, because my iron's really low and my blood oxygen saturation is in the toilet low right now, and it's very dangerous to my health. Therefore, if I was to get COVID, like this could be really bad for me. I could end up in hospital, right? And yet I'm still saying that I don't want that, you know, thing in my arm. But like, again, to communicate these things from a place where we're like, okay, so what do we want? What do we want as a collective? What do we want? So we can take the actual needs of what we want instead and potential strategies for how can we monitor this? How can we test for this? How can we do something instead? It doesn't necessarily require that we need to get chips in our arms or whatever in order to create an outcome. How do we get the data needed to sufficiently manage this situation? And how do we do the reporting in a way that is voluntary and everybody gets on board with it, as opposed to it's a forced initiative? Because there are ways that we can, again, like look how fast everybody initially in the response to Corona, we had a phase here where everybody just went, you know what, let's be there for the vulnerable, right? Let's be there for each other. And we started in that energy, and we started lockdown from that place of like, let's love each other, let's have each other's backs, let's not leave anyone out. We started from that place. But now it's like we're falling into the fear place of holy hell. Now the government's going to, like, there's the whole of the conspiracy theory, all the conspiracy theory things are coming into play. And then the fear story is coming into play, and all of that's coming into play. And depending on what your experience has been, who knows what's truth in the end. But like, again, It's bringing it back to, we have to get as a society, individually and collectively, to a place of how do we do something constructive? How do we get what we want together? How do we create that? Any group initiatives that we take, any social media movements or anything that we set up, or face-to-face, just politician style, getting on the phone and, you know, getting on the phone to your networks, like the way that, you know, a lot of charities that I know, or political organisations pre-election here in New South Wales and Australia, like they do is just getting on the phone to everyone in their database and having conversations about this. And then from there, we were coming together and taking actions in the community. Like, we can do some really good things from that place in what is essentially meant to be the Aquarian age, right? This is where we're meant to be, like coming into this loving place, this place of collaboration, this place of working together. This is the chance to really walk our talk on stepping into that, as opposed to playing into the old patterns of war. Exactly what we were saying earlier about, you know, there's an aspect of playing into the bully victim dynamic, which is a choice, right? It doesn't always feel like it when it's still unconscious to us, when it's still a wound from childhood, when it's still a coping strategy that we learned to deal with a difficult situation. For example, men in this country, in generations past, when men came back from the war and they were traumatized from the war, it was not, we existed in a patriarchal culture that didn't empower men to show their emotions. It said that men were weak if they showed emotions. Certainly when you're in a war situation, it does not honor you to sit down when you're in the middle of gunfire, to sit down and feel the feels and do an emotional process, right? So there's legitimate reasons for coping strategies. They had to shut down. And then they came back doing that and then teaching their kids like this same thing. And it was a coping strategy. Let's not go into all this being too much. And then there's this whole generation of kids that are learning anytime they're emotionally vulnerable and their parents didn't know how to handle it. No one knew how to handle it, and then told them stop doing that. Then they've internalized a coping mechanism in shutting down their own stuff in order to cope. There is a level where we've got this coping mechanism, and then once you develop this coping mechanism and you keep using it throughout life, it becomes automatic. The more you keep doing it, it becomes ingrained, and it goes from just being an initial thing to being this highly ingrained pattern which is in us. So then when it comes to playing out in adult life, so there's someone in my life that's just, I've been struggling with him doing this at the moment. Like, he literally does not see how bullying and violent he is when he has these explosive outbursts, because this is the way he's coped his whole life. And this is how he was taught to deal with that. There's a part of him that was taught to shut down his emotions, and there was a part of him that was role modeled in exploding on people is how I get my stuff out. And that's his method of being shown love at times as well, because sometimes in my life I'm getting screamed, he's screaming, I love you, but he's wrecking stuff and trashing stuff and yelling at me at the same time. So there's mixed messages within that, but it's a coping mechanism and it's completely automatic, right? So again, it's like bringing it out of the automaticness of the coping mechanism to again come back to playing a choice, because there's an addiction, there's a physical addiction, and there's a need to meet some unconscious need as well within playing that out with people, right? Like, is it a power thing? Do we need to feel powerful? Is it are we addicted to the anger? Are we addicted to, in our bodies? To a certain point, when it's been a pattern that's been ingrained our whole life, what happens if we change? What happens if we do something different? If I start behaving in a different way, that's all I've ever known. So my safety net, even though that strategy may not have been working for me my entire life, it was safe, it was known, and now I have to step completely into the unknown of being something else in order to be a different person. And that's scary territory, because that takes a whole lot of trust. So that's tricky as well. Yet it's the doorway we all have to walk through in kind of going, okay, so I've got my own internal attachments to playing in the stuff or to playing this out. Okay, I'm seeing that I'm doing it, but I'm going to choose not to react to that right now, even though that, you know, just hurling my shit over someone else right now may make me feel better. It may be my cathartic method of release. But again, it comes back to is that helping to get to the place of truth? Is it helping you to get closer to the place where you both find out what you really want and how you work together? So there's that choice point. To any of the collective conversations that we have where we come up with strategies going forward, it's got to be from that place of, we have that place of choice. I should say we have, I shouldn't say we've got to. That's very black and white of me in that, but it's like we have that choice. This is the possibility of the new age. It's the learning, it's the lesson that we all collectively are being asked to step through, I think.
What you're talking about is that there's a lot of fear of change, and I absolutely agree to that.
Yes.
And the other thing I wanted to say, that only an ego needs a strategy. A self does not. A self operates from honesty and truth.
Trust.
If we really would be honest, then we would say, well, this coronavirus is a designer virus. We already have Nobel Prize holders who do speak of that, who really say, this is a designer virus. We don't know where it comes from, but it is designed definitely. So we have to honor that we, as humans, designed a weapon. And now, as it is our creation and it is dangerous, how do we deal with it? And do we really want to create weapons? We have
particularly when
ask the question.
Yeah, particularly not when viruses don't have to be, they're not something we need to be at war with, like you said, right? All microbes, we actually, in nature, we work together, and in nature, there's a possibility of a symbiotic relationship, and there's the possibility of changing this relationship with this virus at every single person who potentially comes in contact with it. There's a great opportunity there as well.
Yeah, well, look, I'm just aware that we're running a bit of short time. Erena, you got some things that you just wanted to offer there?
Just briefly, Nat mentioned about the addiction of this. My perspective of that is that it's an addiction to drama. And that comes from the root of not being or feeling that we don't matter, not being seen or being heard. So it's just like the little child who knows they get attention if they act out, so they're going to act out. They get bad attention, often get slapped around, but it's their only way of actually being noticed, feeling that somebody is giving them some attention. So it's that whole drama cycle. And as we learn to break that, realize that we don't need to be creating drama, we don't need to be inviting drama, we can actually start stepping out of that. And just coming back to that whole collective of what do we want to create going forward. My own personal experience with my marriage was that I was experiencing the abuse. And it was a constant thing, and I came to the place that it's actually, I want to have a different experience. I don't want this anymore. So what do I want to experience? So I started to think about and to feel into the things that I wanted to experience in my marriage. And I made that my focus. And every now and again, even during the day, something would happen, or I would get a memory of something, and I'd have to remind myself, no, Erena, you don't want to keep experiencing that. You want to experience this. And I brought myself constantly back to what is it that I want to experience, and feeling into that. And the power of that was so much quicker than what I could ever believe possible. So this doesn't need to take a long time, and it doesn't need to be laborious, and it doesn't need to be painful. If we all focus on the picture and how it would feel of what we actually want to experience, then collectively, because that was just me doing that, and I transformed my marriage in a very, very short time. But collectively, you imagine the energy that creates and how quickly that will snowball. And then that will, I want to use the word suck, but it will draw other people into it because they want more of the juiciness of what we can create. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It definitely, you know, brings me into my answer to my own question, which is what Mariana and I are doing, which is to help facilitate a movement. So the movement of change, you know, directly away from all the stuff that we're talking about. And, you know, this is the key thing. It's being self-responsible and holding, as you say, Erena, actually holding exactly what it is that you do want, holding on to that and coming back to it time and time again. So that's our opinion of what to do, is to you know, facilitate a movement. It's not our movement. It's a movement of individuals who are making a, you know, sort of a, you know, like a parallel decision. It's that idea of the parallel decisions. It's certainly not about either Ariana or myself actually, you know, being the boss. So we don't want any more bosses. Anyway, Marianne, do you have anything further to say?
As far as we can see now, we have the summit running on the German side for 6 weeks now. And the voices that come in from the participants and from the speakers quite directly go that the future is in communities and in self-responsible communities where we as sovereign beings would like to live in a very, very peaceful way and speak our truth, live from our hearts, and be of service to each other. This is what, in honesty, most of people want, but they just don't know how to accomplish it. And they just don't know how to get into communities because what you said, they are so hurt. They're so still in the victim and bully thing that they cannot believe that there's some way of living together where this just does not take place, where we don't have to defend ourselves, but just can be and get into touch with each other, and it's only nice. And I have, oh, I see a dog there. Who is he?
Sammy.
What's his name?
The name's Sammy.
Sammy.
I'll turn my screen off so you can see her. He's just put an appearance, so she might have something.
Do you want to say something? Sammy,
well,
maybe. Say something? Just
Sammy often comes at the end of your sessions, doesn't Sammy?
Yeah.
Neil, can you understand what Sammy wants to say?
I'll let somebody else interpret that.
It's not what you'd expect, which is that it's dinner time.
No.
No, it's actually about patience. So Sammy's message to us is about patience. So being able to peacefully be patient. So this is an aspect of the movement that we could take from Sammy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Being patient, but also having the intention of what you want. So like you're saying, Erena, this is what I want. This is the experience I want to have. And we're going forward. And but you know, Sammy's message is about being patient. It's interesting. I must say, when I saw the,
I was just going to add to that, Neil. It's actually about being patient with ourselves, because we're human. We've lived these patterns for, I don't know, for me, 54 years.
Dogs are just so radiant of love. And of course, dogs would say, be patient and take your time.
Yes. That's the kind of compassion that we need right now too, right? Because it's so easy to just close our hearts when we see anger, but dogs have that beautiful gift of no matter what we do, somehow they manage to love us anyway. So thank you, Sammy, for that beautiful reminder.
For turning up and just reminding us what it is all about.
Mm.
And looks like we've lost Erena and Sammy. That's unfortunate. So we've had people dropping in and out of this today, but thank you, Nat, and thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Kerri, and thank you, Erena. And I think that's a great place to to complete our sundowner today. So go well, both of you, and we'll go from there. So thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
very, very
Thank
much.
you all. Thank you all for watching.
Oh, here we go. I got Erena back.
Erena's back.
No, I was just actually closing off, Erena. So, like, thank you so much, for your contribution, and we've got plenty of things to go forward with here in terms of collective action that we can take based on an individual decision.
Yes, and thanks again to Sammy, who had the last word on compassion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is what we were told today. I think this is to see each other, to look at each other and be very flat. And even a dog has a voice and wants to contribute. And it's our responsibility to hear it and to act on it.
Mm. Yeah.
And what contribution did he make? Great contribution.
Yes. Go well, thank you all. Be patient with yourself. Be kind.
Bye, everybody.
Until we meet again. Bye.
That's right.
Bye.